Ending violent crime is a top priority for leaders all around the country. And earlier today, U.S. Attorney Andrew Luger joined other federal, state, and local law enforcement members to announce recent actions to fight violent crime. Here's what his strategy will include. Good morning. When I started as United States Attorney earlier this year, I received a unanimous message, urgent message from our community and from law enforcement that this office needed to take on a leadership role to address the dramatic rise in violent crime in Minnesota. On May 3rd, I announced that we together would make violent crime our top priority. Part of that has included a commitment to our community to be consistent in our actions and transparent with what we are doing and what we are seeing on the streets of our cities. This morning, I will discuss some of the dozens of cases that we have brought against high-risk, violent offenders in the past few days and weeks, and recent special law enforcement operations to make our cities safer. But first, I want to explain what our Violent Crime Initiative has revealed about the nature of the violence that we are facing. I want the people of Minnesota to know what we know about the violence afflicting our state. The violent crime statistics are alarming. Shootings, carjackings, and gang activity are at or near all-time highs. Chief Huffman will summarize some of those numbers as they relate to Minneapolis. But the numbers are only part of the story. Minnesotans need to know the rest. What law enforcement is encountering on the streets of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and other cities today is far more disturbing than even the alarming numbers show. By their actions, their weapons, and their words, violent offenders are displaying an absolute disdain for the law and a disregard for human life. As a result, the nature of the violence on our streets has changed. It is far more dangerous. As we have learned from violent offenders themselves, the disdain many offenders are showing grows out of a belief that they simply will not be held accountable for their actions. Because of this belief, criminals have upped the ante, engaging in ever more violent behavior that threatens our safety in more dangerous ways. So this is what we have seen over the past few months of our Violent Crime Initiative. Larger numbers of violent offenders are employing far more militaristic and deadly weapons. Chief among these are Glock 19s equipped with auto-sears or switches that turn these handguns into fully automatic machine guns. These machine guns are having a devastating and destructive effect in our communities. At our May 3rd announcement, we played a video showing the ferocity of a Glock 19 operating as a machine gun. Now, through our investigations, we have seen firsthand how they are being employed on the streets of our cities. And we are bringing tough federal charges against criminals who possess these dangerous machine guns. Simply possessing a machine gun is a federal crime that brings serious federal penalties. In many of our cases, we are also seeing offenders ratchet up the violence by using devices and accessories such as body armor, laser scopes, and extended magazines that can turn ordinary disputes into deadly encounters at a moment's notice. What used to be knives are now guns. What used to be guns are now machine guns. And what used to be bullet wounds are now deadly sprays of machine gun fire. This is what we're hearing from hospitals and emergency medical personnel. In addition, we have seen a dramatic increase in drug-related violence. As a result, we have included the DEA and Homeland Security and their task forces as part of our violent crime initiative. These agencies are focusing heavily on the sale of fentanyl, a deadly drug that is highly profitable. Many fentanyl dealers arm themselves with machine guns and militaristic gear to protect their deadly trade. Yesterday, in addition to the enforcement actions in the Twin Cities that I'll talk about in a moment, DEA agents and local officers arrested violent drug dealers in Rochester. We have brought federal charges against 10 of these drug dealers who were protecting their organization with high-powered firearms. I am pleased that the DEA and Homeland Security are working with us to address the violence that fentanyl and other illegal drugs bring to our communities. Together, our federal, state, and local partners have focused our resources on charging the most violent offenders in our communities and taking them off the streets. This week, 2 national ATF Special Response, or SRT teams, traveled to Minnesota to conduct joint law enforcement operations alongside other federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. These SRT teams are elite tactical groups that travel to high-crime areas to arrest significant violent offenders, like those we are targeting in our communities here. Yesterday, these teams arrested high-risk violent offenders in Minneapolis and St. Paul, who now face serious federal charges. My partners with the ATF will share additional information about yesterday's arrests and the operation in a moment. And I want to pause and say that while we are fortunate that 2 of these elite teams traveled to our community to help us arrest high-level targets, it is sad news that we in Minnesota need them in the first place, but we do. Yesterday's operation is just the latest example of our violent crime initiative in action. Throughout the summer, local, state, and federal enforcement officers from the ATF, FBI, Homeland Security, BCA, DEA, the marshals, the sheriff's offices, and their violent offender task forces, and local police, such as the MPD and the St. Paul Police, have focused their resources to change this wave of violence and bring the most dangerous offenders to justice. We have charged literally dozens with violent carjacking, armed robbery, illegal firearm use, and gang-related crimes. Over the past couple of weeks alone, we have charged over 35 high-risk violent offenders, all of whom will remain in custody pending trial and who face serious federal sentences if convicted. These include, for example, a serial offender arrested by an FBI SWAT team for multiple armed robberies against immigrant-owned grocery stores. On May 3rd, I pledged that all of my criminal prosecutors would be handling violent crime cases, including myself, and we are. This significant increase in the number of investigations and prosecutions requires an all-hands-on-deck approach, and I am proud of the work that the prosecutors in this office have done in just these few months. We have responded to the needs of our community and will continue to do so every day. For those displaying a disdain for the rule of law and public safety, these charges should be a wake-up call. The mistaken belief that few consequences will flow from your actions has been proven false multiple times over. In this regard, I will highlight just a few of the recent cases that exemplify both this new level of violence and what we are doing about it. First, the case of Derek Scott. Derek Scott has 8 prior felony convictions, including multiple convictions for domestic violence. When agents arrested him recently, he was in possession of deadly fentanyl pills that he was selling and a machine gun to protect his trade. This is bad enough. But here is what shows the attitude on the street that we are seeing in our investigations. When Mr. Scott was brought into federal custody, he told the officers that he would have no trouble doing a short amount of prison time and that he would get back on the street, get more machine guns when he's released. Even as he was being processed by officers, he was scoffing at the rule of law. He then proclaimed, "I will still be the king." But Scott's bravado was badly misplaced. Possessing a machine gun in furtherance of the sale of fentanyl carries with it a mandatory 30-year federal prison sentence. If convicted, Scott will not terrorize the streets of Minneapolis for decades. Given the disdain that we are confronting, we need the word to get out. Anyone considering selling fentanyl and using a machine gun needs to understand that fentanyl and a machine gun can equal 30 years in prison. Another example is the carjacking investigation led by the FBI and Minneapolis police involving a violent ring that targeted Uber and Lyft drivers. And I cannot say enough about the hard work of the FBI agents and analysts and the Minneapolis Police Department on these investigations. I have worked personally with them. They work around the clock, 7 days a week, to bring people to justice on behalf of the victims. As outlined in the superseding indictment, 4 defendants, who have all now been arrested, charged, and detained, targeted and terrorized ride-share drivers by luring them to specific locations under the guise of picking up or dropping off passengers. When the drivers would arrive, the defendants assaulted, pistol-whipped, and threatened to kill the victims. These defendants, as charged, perpetrated multiple violent acts against their many victims, and one is charged with assaulting a federal law enforcement official during an attempted arrest. These carjackings were not one-offs or random opportunities for joyriding. They were organized, calculated, violent crimes. The defendants turned carjacking into a business. They stole victims' vehicles, stole their wallets, and forced the victims to give them passwords so they could transfer money from the victims' phone app accounts. I've had the opportunity to speak with most of the carjacking victims in this case, many of whom are recent immigrants who just wanted to earn a living and support their families. Everyone I spoke with shared the similar harrowing story, and some have not been able to return as ride-share drivers because of the stress and the trauma of what they went through. Simple folks who just wanted to earn a living to support their families. Finally, I want to highlight the type of violent offender that we have all placed at the top of our priority list. Shooters who repeatedly harm and sometimes kill their victims with their unrepentant violent behavior. Just one example is the case of Saladin Salim. Salim has a long history of violent crimes. After serving 15 years in federal prison for a prior weapons offense, Salim recently returned to Minneapolis, where he quickly obtained guns and went on a shooting spree. Salim shot 7 people over just a few days and killed one of them. As his victims went to the hospital day after day, he obtained more weapons and shot more people. We have charged Salim with serious federal weapons offenses that should ensure that he is never in a position to kill anyone on the streets of Minneapolis again. These cases and many more are playing out every day in our cities. We are working hard to turn this around. One way to do this is to speak and act clearly and concisely. Anyone involved in gang activity, the sale of fentanyl, possession of a machine gun, or shootings on the streets of our cities will face serious federal charges. Your mistaken belief that there will be no consequences for your actions will only get you a significant federal prison sentence with no parole. I've said this directly to gang members and to defendants who have come in to cooperate with us, and they have implored us to say it publicly, to reach others, to turn them around, and that's what we were doing.
Keep watching CBS News Minnesota for continuing coverage.